I want to say this happened last December, right around New Year's Eve, but honestly the whole period after that night feels blurry, so some details might be slightly off. I do remember how it felt though, and that part hasn't faded at all. A few weeks before New Year's, I got a message from an old friend of mine named Ben. The message was short and enthusiastic, something like, "New Year's Eve party at my place. You have to come." It surprised me because Ben and I hadn't been especially close for a while. We'd been inseparable in high school. Our parents knew each other, we were always at one another's houses, and for a long time it felt like we were going to stay friends forever. That didn't happen. Life pulled us in different directions, and at some point we had a falling out over something that feels pretty stupid now. After that, we drifted apart. We didn't completely lose contact. We'd like each other's posts online, run into each other for coffee once in a while, exchange a few polite messages here and there. It always felt friendly, just distant. So when he invited me to this party, I took it as a genuine attempt to reconnect. He'd mentioned meeting new people and building a new social circle, and I figured this was his way of including me again. That night was cold in that sharp, dry way, where the air stings your nose and your breath hangs in front of you. Ben lived on the outskirts of town, in an old Victorian-style house I'd never been to before. I remember thinking it was a strange choice for him, but I didn't dwell on it. When I pulled into his driveway, I noticed a couple of other cars parked there already. That actually made me feel better. I didn't want to be the first one there, and seeing other cars reassured me that this was a normal party and not something awkward. As soon as I got out of my car, though, I had this quiet sense of unease. Nothing dramatic, just that subtle feeling in your gut that something is slightly off. The house itself didn't help. It was tall and dark, and the windows glowed with this yellowish light that felt harsher than it should have. I remember thinking it looked like the kind of house people use in haunted house attractions. I knocked, and someone inside yelled for me to come in. The moment I stepped inside, I was hit with loud music, and the smell of cheap beer mixed with something heavier and unfamiliar. The place felt crowded in an odd way, even though it wasn't actually full of people. Ben came over almost immediately and hugged me. He seemed excited, but when I looked at him closely, something felt different. His eyes were wide and almost too bright, and his smile didn't quite reach them. He grabbed my arm and said he wanted me to meet everyone, then pulled me into the living room. That's when I realized how small the party actually was. There were only 3 other people there, 2 women and 1 guy. Ben introduced them as Sarah, Emily, and Mark. All of them made me uncomfortable in ways I couldn't immediately explain. Sarah barely moved when she stood there, like she was holding herself unnaturally still. Mark couldn't seem to stop fidgeting, even when he sat down. Emily laughed constantly, but it was sharp and repetitive, like she was reacting on a delay. Individually, I might have brushed it off. Together it felt strange. As the night went on, things didn't get better. The music got louder, but the energy in the room felt heavier. Conversations would start and then trail off halfway through, like everyone forgot what they were saying. Sometimes they'd look at me at the same time, and there was this vacant, unfocused look in their eyes that made me feel like I didn't belong there. They started talking about ideas I didn't really understand, not jokingly either. Things about cycles, transitions, and preparing for something new. They used vague terms and spoke in a way that felt rehearsed, like they were repeating phrases they'd memorized. I kept telling myself it was just alcohol and weird personalities clashing. At one point, I stepped into the kitchen just to get some space. A few minutes later, Sarah came in and climbed onto the counter near the window. She stared outside for a long time without saying anything. Then she asked me, very calmly, if I could feel it. I asked what she meant, even though my heart was already racing. She said something about energy building and how the night was important. Then she hopped down, walked past me, and left the room like nothing had happened. That was when I decided I needed to leave. I went back toward the living room to find Ben and tell him I was heading out. What I saw stopped me cold. In the center of the room was a small setup on a low table. Candles, stones, and a small wooden box sat arranged in a way that didn't look random. The flickering candlelight made everyone's faces look distorted. I asked Ben what was going on. He turned to me, and the look on his face made my stomach drop. His excitement had hardened into something intense and unsettling. He said they were welcoming a new beginning, that the night mattered, and that they were doing this together. When I questioned him, his tone changed completely. He told me I wouldn't understand and that I wasn't part of it. The music suddenly got louder, and the others started speaking at the same time, repeating the same phrases over and over. I backed away and headed for the door. Ben stepped in front of me and asked where I thought I was going. When I told him I was leaving, he said something I still think about, that I couldn't just walk away because I'd seen too much. I don't remember deciding to hit him. I just remember reacting. I shoved past him, got the door open, and ran outside into the cold. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I reached my car, locked the doors, and sat there shaking until I could get my hands steady enough to drive. For days after that, I couldn't sleep properly. I felt like I was being watched. I kept replaying everything, trying to convince myself it was just a strange party that got out of hand. Eventually, I went back to Ben's house to confront him. In daylight, the place looked ordinary. Ben answered the door looking exhausted and worn down. Inside, the house was messy, but the setup from that night was gone. He told me they'd been trying to reach something bigger than themselves, and that it had gone wrong. He said they were done now and that it was over, but nothing about his voice sounded confident. I never saw Ben or the others again after that. They disappeared from my life entirely. I still don't know what they were really doing that night. I only know that something about it felt deeply wrong, and that feeling hasn't ever fully gone away. This happened almost 4 years ago, in the early hours of New Year's Day. I was 17 at the time, a senior in high school, about 5'10" and maybe 160 pounds. I grew up in a pretty quiet suburban area, the kind of place where you don't usually expect trouble. That night, I'd been at a New Year's party at a friend's house, about a 20-minute walk from mine. Around 1 in the morning, I decided to head home with another friend who lived on the same block as me. The friend hosting the party offered us a ride, and looking back, we probably should have taken it. But the neighborhood felt safe. There were 2 of us, and we figured other people might need rides more than we did. We said goodbye and started walking. The streets were empty, aside from the occasional car, and the sidewalks were well lit enough that we didn't feel uneasy at first. On the way home, my friend wanted to grab a pack of cigarettes, so we stopped at a gas station. The place was almost empty. There was a woman pumping gas, and a guy standing near the front of the store, looking at his phone. Nothing seemed off. We went inside, my friend paid for the cigarettes, and we walked back out. As soon as we stepped onto the sidewalk, my friend lit one up. That's when we heard someone call out behind us, "Hey, wait." We turned around and saw the guy from the front of the store walking quickly toward us. He looked like he was in his early to mid-20s, a little shorter than me, pretty slim. He asked if he could get a light. It didn't seem like a big deal, so my friend lit his cigarette. The guy thanked us, and we started walking again. He didn't stop following us. He asked where we were headed, and we told him we were just walking home. We asked where he was going, and he said his friends were at a party nearby, and he'd stepped out to get some air. Then he asked if we wanted to come with him. That was when the situation started feeling wrong. I couldn't understand why a guy in his 20s would be so persistent about 2 teenage guys going to a party we knew nothing about. We told him straight up that we didn't know him or anyone at this party, and we weren't interested. He laughed it off and said we seemed cool and needed to loosen up. To try to shut it down, we told him our ages, 18 and 17. He shrugged and said age didn't matter, that he partied with his younger brother all the time. At that point, we were less than 10 minutes from home, and neither of us wanted this guy following us the rest of the way. I finally told him firmly to stop following us and leave us alone. That's when he snapped. He started yelling, calling us rude, saying we were ungrateful and unfriendly. And then he began throwing racial slurs at my friend. My friend told him to back off before things got physical. The guy suddenly took off running in the opposite direction. We stood there for a second, both pretty shaken and angry, then kept walking. We tried to convince ourselves he was just drunk or high and that it was over. A few minutes later, we heard a car pull up behind us, slowing to match our pace. The windows rolled down. It was the same guy sitting in the front seat, with two other people in the car, another man around his age, and a woman who looked like she was in her 30s. He said we'd gotten off on the wrong foot and asked us again if we wanted to come to the party. I leaned toward my friend and told him we needed to get away. My friend told them no, clearly, and asked them to leave us alone. There was a short pause, and then the guy said calmly, "You're coming with us, one way or another." They pulled the car over and all three of them got out. That was it. We didn't hesitate. We ran. We turned down a side street, and my friend yelled that we should run into the park nearby, hoping we could lose them. When I looked back, all three of them were running after us. We cut into the park and headed straight for a darker area with thick trees, even though it was hard to see. I was terrified we'd trip or run straight into one of them. Behind us, one of them fell and shouted in frustration. We kept running until we hit another path and turned sharply. We could hear yelling behind us, and then the woman shouted for them to split up and search. We ducked into the park bathrooms, which were somehow still open, and hid inside. My chest was burning, and it took everything just to slow my breathing. We considered calling the police, but in that moment, all we could think about was getting out of there. After a couple of minutes, we bolted for the nearest park exit. Just before we reached it, we heard someone shout that he'd found us. One of the guys started chasing us again. We ran until we reached my house, rushed inside, and locked the door behind us. We collapsed onto the couch and just sat there, trying to calm down and listen for any sign they'd followed us. I checked the window over and over, but they never appeared. We talked about it quietly, trying to understand what they'd wanted. Robbery, kidnapping, something worse. We honestly didn't know. My friend stayed for a bit before heading home, and then I went to bed, replaying everything in my head and wondering what would have happened if they'd caught us. The next morning I told my parents. They were relieved we were okay, but upset that we hadn't taken a ride. We filed a police report, but nothing ever came of it. To this day, I still think about how close that situation felt, and how easily it could have gone differently. It's the reason I'm always careful about walking late at night now, even in places that seem safe. A few years ago when I was 19, I was walking home after watching the New Year's Eve fireworks. It was around 3 a.m. by the time we got back to my neighborhood. I live in Sydney, in one of those quiet, well-off areas where nothing ever really happens. The kind of place where people forget to lock their doors because they've never had a reason to worry. My friends wanted to get a taxi home. None of us wanted to wake our parents at that hour and ask for a ride. I was the one who pushed for walking instead. I was stubborn, confident, and honestly in a great mood. My friend Aiden complained the entire time. Rohan didn't say much at all. I thought it was funny at the time. We eventually reached the area near my street, and that's where we split up. Their walk home was much longer than mine, and I waved goodbye, still feeling relaxed and upbeat. My house was only a few minutes away. As I passed a small cake shop near the corner, I noticed a guy standing across the street. I didn't stare at him, just a quick glance, but the way he suddenly looked up at me stood out. It wasn't aggressive or obvious, just attentive. I told myself I was overthinking it and kept walking. When I turned onto my street, I immediately noticed how dark it was. It was much darker than I expected, especially compared to the main road. I passed the bowling club and the oval, and I remember feeling the temperature drop. I kept glancing behind me, mostly out of habit. Every time I checked, the street was empty. About halfway down the street, where the road dipped slightly, I noticed something on the footpath ahead of me. I couldn't tell what it was. At the last second, I stepped off the path and onto the road to avoid it, thinking it might be a dead animal. As I did, I turned my head and saw someone behind me. They weren't right on top of me, but they were close enough that my heart jumped. I hadn't seen anyone there seconds earlier, and for them to have closed that distance so quickly made my stomach drop. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. It was just a dark shape moving quietly. Later, when I told people about this, they all said the same thing. At 3 a.m., no one accidentally walks that close behind someone. If you're innocent, you make it obvious. I didn't want to look back again. Instead, I pulled out my phone and tried calling Aiden. My calls wouldn't connect. I tried Rohan. No answer. I kept dialing, over and over, my anxiety building with every failed attempt. I didn't dare turn around to confirm whether the person was still there. By the time I reached my driveway, I felt a surge of relief. I hurried up it, thinking I was finally safe. Halfway up, I glanced over my shoulder again, just for a second, and saw the figure once more. This part still confuses me. For a split second, it looked like they were just passing by, but it also looked like they were about to step onto my driveway. That's when my brain tried to rationalize it. I wondered if it was my brother, Jonathan. Who else would walk up our driveway at that hour? Even if someone had followed me, I couldn't quite believe they'd actually come onto my property. But something about the shape didn't feel right. It didn't look like him. I hurried the rest of the way up and knocked. My mom opened the door immediately. She'd stayed up waiting for me. I don't like thinking about what might have happened if she hadn't been awake. I went inside but left the outer door open and the porch light on, assuming my brother might be coming in behind me. Mom told me I could turn it off. Jonathan had been home for hours. That was the first moment I really felt unsettled, but I brushed it off. I got some water, Mom went to bed, and I grabbed clothes before heading into the bathroom to shower. I turned off the living room lights and tried to relax. Before getting in, I messaged Aiden back. I told him I'd made it home, complained that he hadn't answered, and mentioned I'd felt a bit creeped out but was fine now. I truly believed that at the time. Near the end of my shower, I heard a sound at the window. It didn't sound like the house settling or something brushing past. It sounded deliberate, like hands being placed against the glass. The moment I heard it, I shut the water off and crouched down beneath the window, barely breathing. I stayed there for a long time, listening. Nothing happened. Eventually, I moved slowly, turned off the bathroom light, then turned on the small heater light so I could dry off. That's when I saw the blue lights outside the window. They were small, bright, and completely out of place. The best way I can describe it is that it looked like the lit keypad of a phone. I turned the light off immediately and backed into the corner, wrapped in my towel, shaking. I stayed there in the dark, terrified to move. Then more blue lights appeared, brighter this time, shifting as if someone was trying to angle them through the glass. That was enough. I unlocked the door and ran straight to my parents' room, barely able to speak. Mom jumped up, and Dad heard footsteps retreating down the driveway. That sound is the only reason I know for sure this wasn't my imagination. I didn't sleep at all that night. Even in the morning, I was on edge, especially when Dad went outside. We never found out who it was. Some people think it might have been the person I passed earlier. My brother thinks someone may have been hiding near the oval and stepped out when I walked around whatever was on the path. All I know is that I don't walk alone at night anymore. Not in that neighborhood. Not anywhere. It only takes one moment for something to go wrong. This is still the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me, and it completely changed how safe I thought my town was. It happened on New Year's Eve a few years ago. One of my close friends, Jess, called and asked if I wanted to go to the New Year's festival down at the beach with her and her boyfriend, Tyler. I usually didn't do much for New Year's and would normally just stay home, so I agreed straight away. Every year, the beach hosts a big festival with rides, food stalls, live bands, and fireworks at midnight. It's always packed, loud, and busy, but the atmosphere is usually relaxed and fun. Jess asked if I could pick her and Tyler up on the way, and also mentioned that our friend Haley was coming too. The plan was to meet at Haley's unit and walk down to the festival together since she lived close to the beach. I didn't have my license at the time, so my dad drove us. We picked up Jess and Tyler first, then headed to Haley's place. Her unit was right near the water, maybe a 5-minute walk from where the festival was set up. When we arrived, she was already outside enjoying the sunset. We went up to her unit, caught up for a bit, grabbed some water, and chatted with her mum before heading out. The festival itself was great. We went on rides, ate food, sat on the sand, and watched bands play. It felt nice to be out without parents hovering for once. After a while, we danced near the stage until we were tired and thirsty, then decided to head back to Haley's unit for water, since we'd spent all our money. By then it was around 11 and fully dark. As we walked away from the crowds, it got quieter and darker pretty quickly. There weren't many streetlights near the unit, and I remember feeling slightly uneasy for no real reason. It was probably just the sudden quiet after hours of noise, but I found myself walking closer to the middle of the group without thinking about it. We ran into some people we knew from school and stopped to talk for a bit, which distracted me enough that the feeling passed. We reached Haley's unit, grabbed water, and sat around for a while waiting for fireworks time. At some point, Haley asked if she could sleep over at my place, and after checking with my parents, it was all good. Just before midnight, we left again to head back to the beach. About a minute down the road, Haley realized she'd forgotten her knee medication and needed to go back. Jess seemed a bit annoyed but agreed. On the way back, Jess was unusually quiet, which stood out because she's normally the most talkative one. When I asked if she was okay, she brushed it off. After Haley grabbed her medication, Jess suggested we walk on the other side of the road where it was better lit and closer to families near a playground. It made sense, so we agreed. As we crossed the road, Jess quietly told us not to look behind us and to walk faster. That's when things shifted from uncomfortable to genuinely alarming. Once we were across, I asked Jess what was wrong. She told us there were 3 men in black hoodies following us, and that she'd noticed them earlier when we walked back to the unit for water. That explained the feeling I'd had before. What really bothered me was knowing they'd waited around for us. I glanced sideways just enough to see them. They were tall, broad, dressed all in black, with their hoods pulled tight and bandanas covering their faces. It was warm out, so the clothing alone felt wrong. They were clearly watching us and keeping pace. Jess told us again not to look, and we picked up speed. None of us wanted to confront them. Even though Tyler and I weren't small people, 3 strangers moving like that was not something we wanted to test. Ahead, the path narrowed and turned into bushland. Going around it would have meant moving closer to them, so without really saying it out loud, we cut through the bushes instead. It wasn't a long stretch, just enough to reach the festival car park. Halfway through, we heard heavy footsteps behind us. Someone swore loudly, and that was enough. We ran. We didn't look back. We just ran until we burst out of the bushes into the open car park, and kept going until we hit the crowds again. Once we slowed down, I looked back and saw the 3 men standing near the edge of the lot. One of them was holding something metallic that caught the light. That's when I started to feel sick. We pushed deeper into the crowd and stayed there for the fireworks. None of us were really enjoying them anymore, but being surrounded by people made us feel safer. Instead of leaving early like we'd planned, we waited and left with everyone else. When it was time to go, we stuck close to other groups and headed to the larger car park where my dad was picking us up. While we waited, I scanned the area and saw them again, partially hidden behind a tree. The tallest one lifted his hand just enough for me to see a knife, then made a slow gesture across his throat. We moved immediately, staying in the light and near people until my dad arrived. We got in the car without saying much and went home. Nothing ever came of it after that, and I never saw them again. But whatever they were planning that night, I don't think it was anything good. Even now, thinking about how close they were still makes my skin crawl. This happened to me on New Year's Eve about a year ago. I'd spent the night at a small get-together with friends. Nothing wild or out of control. Just people hanging out, eating, talking, and waiting for midnight to pass. By the time I finally headed home, the streets were quiet in that strange post-celebration way, and it had to be close to 3 in the morning. I was walking along the sidewalk, half tired and half still buzzing from the night, when I noticed a man coming toward me from the opposite direction. He looked middle-aged, dressed normally, and at first I didn't think anything of it. People were still wandering around here and there, and I assumed he was just heading home too. But as we got closer to each other, I realized he'd slowed his pace, almost matching mine. When we passed, I noticed him glance at me and smile. It wasn't aggressive or strange, just unexpected, so I smiled back without really thinking. A second later, I felt silly for even noticing him and told myself I was reading too much into it. That's when I heard him call out behind me. He said something to get my attention, and I stopped, turning around to see what he wanted. He had changed direction and was walking back toward me, one arm slightly extended. When he reached me, he held his hand out like he wanted to shake mine. That was the moment my body reacted before my brain could catch up, and I hesitated. I became very aware of how quiet the street was and how close we were standing. A lot of thoughts rushed through my head all at once. What if this was a bad idea? What if I was misjudging the situation? What if I needed to leave quickly? I tried to read his expression, looking for anything that felt off. He seemed calm, maybe a little unsteady, like he'd been drinking, but not angry or intense. After a brief pause that probably felt longer to me than it did to him, I shook his hand. I remember thinking that if anything felt wrong, I could always pull away and keep walking. He started talking right away, asking simple things, how my night had been, whether I'd enjoyed New Year's Eve, that sort of thing. He kept holding my hand while he spoke, which still made me uncomfortable, but his tone was casual and friendly. Slowly, the tension eased, and I answered him politely. I even asked how his night had been in return. After a few seconds, he let go, smiled again, and wished me a happy new year. Then he turned and continued down the sidewalk like nothing unusual had happened. I stood there for a moment, watching him walk away, before continuing on my own route home. As I walked, I felt a mix of relief and embarrassment for how nervous I'd been. He hadn't meant any harm at all. If anything, he seemed like someone who'd had a few drinks and wanted to spread good cheer before the night ended. Still, that brief moment of uncertainty, when I didn't know what his intentions were, stuck with me. Even now, I don't think of it as a scary encounter exactly, but it was a reminder of how quickly a situation can feel uncertain when you're alone late at night. That pause, that second of not knowing what would happen next, is something I don't think I'll ever forget. I was living in New Zealand at the time, and I was 23 years old. My birthday is on New Year's Day, so that time of year always kind of blurs together for me now. I'm 28 as I'm writing this. There's a big festival held in the south of the North Island every year, the kind where people camp for days, drink non-stop, and barely sleep. It can go on for almost a week, and by New Year's Eve most people are already exhausted, sunburnt, and half out of it. This happened early one morning, probably New Year's Eve. People had been awake for days, and I woke up really early, around 6 a.m., and decided to shower before everyone else used up the hot water. I grabbed what I needed and walked over to the portable toilets first. They were in one of those temporary buildings up a short flight of stairs, split into men's and women's sections. As I was walking up the stairs, I heard someone call out to me. I turned around and saw a guy walking toward me. I stopped, assuming he might be asking for directions or something about the campsite. He came up and said something like, "Hey, what's your name?" and stuck his hand out to shake mine. It already felt a little strange, since I was halfway up the stairs and clearly heading into the toilets, but I shook his hand anyway and said hello. When I tried to pull my hand back, he didn't let go right away. Instead, he asked if he could get my number. I yanked my hand free and laughed in that awkward defensive way you do when you're uncomfortable, and said something along the lines of, "It's 6 in the morning and I'm on my way to the toilet. I'm not giving you my number." He looked annoyed, shrugged, and walked off. I assumed that was the end of it. After I finished in the bathroom, I came back out and happened to glance up ahead. That's when I saw him crouched behind a tree. He didn't notice me noticing him, so I kept walking like I hadn't seen anything. As I headed toward the showers, I saw him dart from behind the tree and move behind a nearby food stall, closer to where I was headed. At that point, my stomach dropped. The stairs to the showers were just behind that building. I walked toward them, but instead of going up, I ducked away and hid. A few seconds later, I saw him run around the building and straight up the shower stairs. That was it for me. I took off running. I was scared, but I was also angry. I ran until I found some poor, clearly hungover guy throwing up near his tent. I quickly explained what was going on and asked if I could stand with him for a minute. He probably wouldn't have been much help if anything happened, but just not being alone made a difference. Once I'd calmed down a bit, I went to find security. I didn't want anyone else dealing with the same thing. I explained everything to one of the officers, and we walked the campground together. There was a hilly section that blocked part of the site from view, and when we came over it, we saw a couple of guys messing around, throwing random things at tents. One of them was him. I pointed him out to the security officer and immediately backed away. Later on, I was told that he'd been kicked out of the festival. I still think about how easily that could have gone differently if I hadn't noticed him when I did. It was broad daylight, surrounded by people, and still, I felt completely unsafe.